Good afternoon, everyone. We've got a very interesting panel for the next hour. We've brought together a group of people who know a lot about sustainable hospitality to address some of the challenges which confront the industry in the next 10 years. There's obviously the crisis around COVID-19, there's climate change, biodiversity loss, and increasing inequality around the world. The new normal, I think, is going to be a very difficult trading environment for business and leisure travel. The other thing I hope we'll get to talk about, perhaps with Eric this afternoon, is that a lot of the properties being built now will still be operating in a very different environment by the 2030s and the 2050s. The decisions we make now, particularly about new builds and retrofitting, will determine the assets we work with in the future. In my view, there are a lot of tried and tested solutions, and I'm hoping some of the speakers today will talk about some of those. But the question is, what are we going to do in the short term to both survive the current crisis and build back better for the future? I'm not going to go around and introduce everyone at the beginning in the normal way. What I'm going to do is introduce people as we go to them for their first comments. I'm going to start with Dimitris Manikis, who is President for Europe of Middle East, Eurasia and Africa for Wyndham Hotels and Resorts. And Dimitris, I wanted to ask you, what do you see as the major problems confronting the sector, and what do you see as the major solutions?
Wow, Harold, hello everybody, and I'm really pleased that I'm here. And as you said, such an esteemed group of colleagues and a great discussion coming up. Look, there's obviously COVID-19 actually was a curveball, right? It was a huge curveball, and so many other people have used the terms unprecedented times. But the reality is that we are a very resilient industry. So if you ask me what I see the major challenges are, they actually haven't changed from what they were before COVID. I don't think COVID is going to change dramatically how we see hospitality going forward. Sustainability has always been a key agenda for us. The over-tourism and overcrowded skies have always have been an agenda for us. The experience versus the mass tourism, how people, local communities view tourists when they actually visit their own grounds. So things haven't actually changed. What COVID actually done, accelerated those discussions and brought them into the fore. So discussions that have been happening already in the backstage and behind the scenes have now become an everyday discussion. So if you ask me about challenges, I would say they're exactly the same as they were about a year ago. But definitely the subject that we're talking about today, which is governance and ethics and sustainability, is absolutely coming to the front. So there are more discussions about those challenges today than they've ever been, and that was a good thing. That is actually a very good thing for the industry.
So I agree with you that the crisis has been a catalyst and probably speeded up change a little. But are you glossing over the problems that maybe not Wyndham, but a lot of hotel businesses around the world have got with cash flow now that they've been unable to operate normally for so long? How big a problem is that going to be going forward, do you think?
Yeah, I think we need to be realistic and pragmatic. It is the time where all our owners, all the franchisees, all the hotel owners out there, their number one priority was to survive. And to survive, not because of their businesses, to survive because of their teams and their communities and everything else that the hospitality has to offer to the local community. So it was, Harold, we have to be careful. Timing is everything in life. We have to be careful when we bring up conversations of that matter, because when the other guy is actually trying to survive, it looks utopic almost for me to go in and start talking about what the future is going to look like and what exactly he needs to do from a sustainability point of view. Everything has to do with timing. Everything has to do with education. Everything has to do with being persistent and not forgetting the narrative and keeping that narrative in a way that the other guy is more receptive. But I really mean that at a time where survival was absolutely critical. It was very important for us not to lose sight of that and bring the conversation at the right time, not just, be like a bull in a china shop. We had to be very careful how we bring these matters up.
Thanks very much, Dimitris. Inga Hubricks from Radisson, you're Global Senior Vice President for Sustainability, Security and Corporate Communications for the Radisson Hotel Group. What's your take on where we're at now and where we might be able to go on the sustainability agenda? Are we still in the survival mode?
Well, I think, of course, it depends on where you are in the world. And as we are all global businesses, for example, in Radisson with 1,500 hotels in 120 countries, it's a varied picture that we are getting around the globe. But I do think, and I fully agree with Dimitris, that we need to be ready for that recovery and to do it in a responsible way. And if we are, because we are going to see accelerated recovery, of course, in the Middle East, hotels are open and the situation is very advanced in terms of vaccination and recovery of business. But elsewhere, we need to be ready, and we see that recovery coming. So I think one of the things, of course, as Radisson, we, being a responsible company, is focusing on think people, think community, and think planet. But one of the things I want to bring forward is especially how to make inclusive employment part of that recovery. Because at one point there were numbers, as different numbers that have been circulating, but there are numbers from the UN, for example, to say that 140 million full-time jobs have been lost in tourism and travel. And as we recover and we start growing those teams again, it's important to go back to these principles of doing that in an inclusive manner. And of course, we are per definition an inclusive business. We thrive on diversity of our teams because that's how we can serve our diverse guests in the best way. So for example, in our company, we find 137 nationalities, which is always one of the richness, I think, of our teams in different locations. But it remains to say that, for example, women have been disproportionately affected by this job loss in tourism and travel. So as we grow our teams again, it's very important to keep focusing on these principles of balanced leadership and of inclusion. So for example, we do that. We have several successes in Radisson, and we continue to adhere to these principles. For example, on the balanced leadership side, in the Middle East, we have extended and enhanced the maternity policy in our company beyond what is legally required. So that gives, for example, some flexibility to young female talent who want to grow their families and at the same time grow inside the company. Another thing to highlight as a success is, for example, in Saudi, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, where we announced the first female GM back in 2017. I think you remember that.
I do remember it.
We even have spoken to Maram, who is an excellent example of leadership. And in that wake of that example, we've grown from just having only 6 female employees in our teams in Saudi in 2014 to already 190 now. So I think these are examples that can accelerate and stand out as best practices. And then a final example, which is actually also in Cape Town, but it's not the background that I have behind me, is one of our Park-In hotels, where we employ 30%, 30% of the staff employed are deaf. So that's a very successful cooperation with the Deaf Association of South Africa. And it's also a successful team. And there too, we have, for example, our one of the staff members became financial controller for several hotels, and the lady is deaf. But she's just a great talent who shows that anything is possible. So I think we need to keep those principles in mind as we rebuild our teams.
One of the things we hear on the radio a lot in the UK on the business programs is the problems that the hospitality sector now has with securing enough employees to open up, because so many have gone home to Europe and aren't particularly wanting to come back to the UK. Is that a problem that Radisson's had in the UK?
Well, I think we are accelerating our efforts to build our teams again. I haven't heard specifically of any issues in the UK or in any countries particularly, but what I do know is that we need to focus on welcoming our employees back, also the ones who have been in furlough, and we have started an internal communication campaign on that, and also to give everybody the tools to train. Because one of the things that we have seen, for example, through the pandemic, but we still see now, is that we have a very strong online training platform, which is both readiness courses, but also job-related, very specific skill-based courses. And our uptake of that environment has already increased 5-fold during the pandemic. So we are actually ready with these higher volumes. And I think we need to use those tools because it's not going to be easy for the hotel teams around the world to ramp up so quickly.
Thanks very much indeed, Inge. Can I come now, Rana, to you? I think you're in Doha, where I guess at the moment it's really quite warm out there. Yeah. Rana, you are the Director of People and Culture for Four Seasons in the Four Seasons Hotel in Doha. How do you see it from both an employment perspective and perhaps more broadly? How do you see the major challenges now for the sector moving forward?
Well, I mean, one of the major challenges actually that we're facing as an industry, which is not new, is the inequality in the labor supply chain. However, during the past few months and due to the pandemic, maybe the challenge has increased. So therefore, recognizing the increased vulnerability of migrant workers because they're desperate for jobs, which makes them or makes them a target actually to be exploited and taken advantage of. Identifying the risks in the labor supply chain. Obviously, the longer the supply chain is, the higher the risk. Risks can be like the debt, mortgage, or bondage, both to recruitment agencies, sub-agencies, and even to employers. Below minimum wage payments, a lack of decent work conditions, mobility restrictions, gender discrimination, and even sexual harassment. Having governance and mechanisms in place to promote the ethical recruitment and employment is extremely important and crucial. Hotel companies actually, and their commitment to fair and ethical recruitment should be integrated in internal policies, decision-making process, strategic goals, and overall vision. Therefore, it is crucial that the company develops clear policy that incorporates the guidance and international standards, not only to ensure the recruitment and deployment of the workers, but also to clarify the standards and practices it expects from the partners, like the recruiters, the service providers, and the placement agencies. Companies can also consider making a public commitment to promote and respect the international labor standards on ethical recruitment and employment. These commitments can be like displaying the human rights policy, supplier code of conduct on its online platforms. Also having a clear, transparent, sufficiently independent governance structure for grievance mechanism to ensure fair and confidential processes that protects the individuals and the employees from retaliation. It's always advisable and recommended to have various pathways as well for employees where they can use.
One of the questions which comes up occasionally is the extent to which you're able to retain, particularly people men and women, who end up on the front desk, where people obviously have very high levels of social skills. Mm-hmm. And those people are often recruited out into higher paying sectors, aren't they? Is that a problem that you have, Rana?
Well, retaining the talents in the hospitality is always as well one of the challenges. However, it depends on the environment that the hotels and the companies are creating. It's always one of the major things that keeps the employees where they are is creating the sense of belonging and creating the right environment for the people where they feel safe, where they feel they fit in, where they feel that they belong, and where they feel that they matter actually, and that they've been looked after, developed, and they have a career and potential to grow within the company.
So we're coming back to that notion of inclusive employment and making sure that people feel included in the culture of the workplace, essentially.
Without the inclusion, you will not be able to create the sense of belonging.
Yeah, I get that. Eric, I think it's very late at night where you are in Singapore. Thank you for joining us this evening, Eric, you are the founder and CEO of Greenview, and I suspect you're going to focus perhaps on new builds. But what do you think are the major issues for the sector over the next 20 years? And are you optimistic?
Thank you, Harold. Pleasure to be here. It's not that late, and especially for these distinguished panelists, great to be on board here. I think that first off, yes, I'm optimistic because you have to be in this field. We have to be positive. We can't be doom and gloom. Nobody likes to hear it. We have to talk about what you can do, not what you can't do or shouldn't do, right? That's what we need to focus it. I think that the challenge for responsible hospitality that we've really seen right now is coping with the pace of change. Whether on the environmental side or the social side, my colleagues, companies we work with, the amount of things coming at them on the environmental side and the social side, whether it come from travelers, from guests, corporate buyers, intermediaries, owners, investors, it's a crazy pace of change that everybody has woken up to the needs. Again, it's not on the environmental side and the social side. And so that change happens so quickly that yes, by 2030, it's going to be a completely different landscape of what's expected of a hotel to be considered responsible, to be considered sustainable. By 2030, at the latest, it probably will be an expectation by your stakeholders that the hotel will be net zero, 100% electricity from renewable resources, that you will be certified to cover the gamut of sustainability issues, that you will have all ethical standards in place for your team and your supply chain. That will be expected by 2030, and it's the pace of change and how we get there that everybody's having a trouble coping with. So, and not only that, but 2030, this is the waking up has been on the consumer side, which then touches investors, which then touches stockholders, which then touches owners, which touches operators, which touches corporate travel buyers, touches everybody. And then there's the fact of we're going to have to face the effects of climate change and the effects of our resource depletion, of biodiversity loss, and all of that. And so some locations may have to change their strategy, and some already are changing their strategy and waking up to that. Yes, there are some serious environmental, physical risks that we're going to have to address, and that is going to cause shifts in how we build, shifts in how we renovate, shifts in how we even strategize for our markets. And so we've seen this, and it's a challenging time for everybody, but remain optimistic. Yes, this is a systemic challenge we've always had about hotels, right? Is that the entity operating the hotel didn't necessarily build the hotel, and there wasn't a linkage directly in the time when the decision was made. Should there be a hotel built here? Yes. What type of hotel? Who's going to build it? What should it be like? How do you design it? And then comes the operator who's going to operate the building. But all of those decisions in the beginning had been made on a much shorter valuation of when I'm going to get my return for building that. Now, in the Middle East, you actually tend to have some longer term holds and vision on this, which is the advantage the Middle East has. This is the longer term thinking about how I'm building and how I'm transitioning to this. But that's been the systemic problem, is looking to build a hotel without incorporating sustainability and these aspects of how to build it correctly, how to build it well, and how to actually integrate in my management agreement. One final thing that I think is the shift of this is we're now seeing so many more owners involved, and it's a matter of getting them involved correctly. So Hospitality Insights from Questex did a investor sentiment survey, just recently released it. We helped them with the ESG question of, are you as an owner having a strategy in place to ensure your operators are addressing sustainability and social responsibility? And 1/5 of the respondents across private equity, family offices everywhere, 1/5 said yes, and we're embedding it in the hotel management agreement. Another 40% said yes in other mechanisms. 18% said we're planning on doing this. And only 18% were no or unsure. And that's a monumental change from how we would have thought about this before. And so it's going to become much more of an issue, but it shouldn't be just at the time when you're signing and locking in a long-term agreement to make sure there's a good partnership between the operator, but when you're looking to build the hotel, to consider these factors and all the gamut of risks and opportunities. So that's why I'm optimistic.
There is a big difference, isn't there, between the employment issues, which you can imagine being progressively improved over time, but it's very expensive to retrofit a hotel once it's been built. And are you beginning to see better designed hotels coming through because of the LEED regulations and certification, or are we still a long way off that happening?
I think regulation is coming, and it's going to come. It's also part of the pace of change. There's so much regulation and potential regulation flying at us from all directions now. But the whole one thing is the renovation and what it can do in general. The other is why renovations were so important. Before, it was all about efficiency. And I need to build efficient, or I need to renovate efficient to reduce energy, reduce water. And reducing energy was the only conduit to talking about carbon emissions. But now the landscape is changing. And so there is no longer this myopia of carbon equals energy usage. It's a totally different game. Carbon is becoming much wider. Energy and the idea of procuring energy as opposed to just using it, and how carbon fits into it, is much different. So it doesn't really necessarily focus only on the renovation for the efficiency piece to get to carbon, and that's much more expanded. Now, the renovation is where we talk about resiliency, about temperature changes, precipitation changes, drought, flood, all those other things that have the physical effect, as well as changing consumer demands. So I think that the renovation piece is not going to focus as much on getting more energy efficiency, because that's going to be tapped in how we look at energy and carbon to begin with. But the making sure you've allocated enough in the reserve, in CapEx, and in planning for what may come down the pipeline for renovation of all the other aspects is very important.
Thanks very much indeed, Eric. Madhu, last but not least, at least in this first round, Madhu Rajesh is the CEO of the new, well, not so new now, it's a year old, I think, the Sustainable Hospitality Alliance. Madhu, do you want to just briefly say something about what the Sustainable Hospitality Alliance is? Because there may be a number of people watching this who are not familiar with the new organization. And then go on to say what you, from the position of the Sustainable Hospitality Alliance, think are the major issues that confront the industry moving forward.
Absolutely. Thank you, Harold. Sustainable Hospitality Alliance is 7.5 months old now, but we build on the legacy of International Tourism Partnership, our former organization and name that goes back 26 years, and perhaps was way ahead of its time in terms of getting hospitality industry leadership to come together and think about sustainability, both environmental and social, and agree to act collectively, recognizing that many of these issues are much bigger than what any individual company can solve on its own. We work with 13 hotel companies, and they're very different in terms of size, scale, geographic footprint, and ownership structures. And that gives us a huge amount of diversity of thought around the table that feeds into our work in a very holistic way. And I'm glad that today we have several of our members on the panel today talking about different elements of sustainability, as well as Eric, who's a long-term collaborator through Greenview. So we, through that diversity of thought and the work we do, the partnerships we have, we aim to create resources and learning and guidance and knowledge sharing that we want to cascade across the whole industry, because our members represent about 25% of the industry, but we want to take the rest of the industry as well on that journey of sustainability, because that's when large-scale change and catalytic impact will actually sort of materialize. I think in terms of our focus areas, so people and planet, so everything that all the other panelists have spoken about sort of represents our remit. And in that, of course, we work on inclusive employment, we work on ethical recruitment, we work on climate action, water stewardship, and responsible consumption. So very holistically looking at what does sustainability mean in a hospitality context, and how do we work together to address some of those issues. I think some of the key things or the challenges that I'm seeing from where I sit at the moment, obviously the industry has been under an immense amount of pressure over the last 12, 15 months. It is unprecedented, the scale of hotel closures that we've had. It's an industry that never sleeps. Hotels generally are 24/7 business, regardless of day of the year, time of day. And to see as many hotels shut their doors as they did was something of a scale that's never been seen before. So that being said, as the industry looks at survival and revival, I take heart in the fact that our member companies did come together and support the launch of the Sustainable Hospitality Alliance. I think that shows the huge, strong commitment that the industry has in terms of sustainability as it looks at its operations today and as it looks at post-COVID recovery and building back. And I think that is something that I'm really, really proud of in the way the industry leadership stood up and took a long-term view at it. In that, I would say, recognizing the challenges, the change that Eric's spoken about, and the scale and the pace of change, what I'm also seeing is an increased amount of interest from both travel buyers as well as consumers and online platforms on accelerating the pace of action for sustainability. And that's excellent to see, because it will most certainly catalyze further action from some of the smaller hotels, as well as challenge the larger hotels to do more. But in equal measure, what I'm also seeing is a lot of replication and duplication, and perhaps because of lack of awareness of what's already happened, a desire to recreate some things as quickly as possible. And I think, the intention is great, but perhaps it's leading to the duplication, which is avoidable. And in that, I think Sustainable Hospitality Alliance has a bigger role to step in and talk about things that we've done, tools we've created, especially our water measurement tool, our carbon measurement tool, that are being used by 25,000 hotels globally, feeding into benchmarking indices that Eric can tell you about, and sort of are there to be used by hotels of any size, from four-bedroom hotel to a large hotel. So a lot of the work that has been happened needs to be acknowledged. With different companies trying to assess hotels and sustainability. Again, I think the pace of action will increase, but equally what that's doing is bombarding a lot of hotels with a lot of requests for information without essentially the wherewithal in place. And how can this information be analyzed to produce something which is meaningful for the travel buyers and the end users? So in that, I think recognizing that there's a need for some kind of clear guidance on how hotels can be benchmarked. What does sustainability actually mean for a hotel, from social to environmental sustainability? And creating a more joined up approach to working across the value chain that Eric was talking about, because the brands that are the logos on the door, they can influence a lot, but there's a limit to their to the influence and the impact of their actions. And by looking at actions that need to be taken upstream and downstream, we will look at progressing much further and faster than we otherwise would. So I think those are the key points I'd like to make.
Thanks, Maddie. Inge, you're there looking as though you're in South Africa. I suspect you're probably in Scandinavia, but you're looking as though you're there in South Africa. And I'm being reminded by what Maddie is saying, so this is her fault, of being the last time I was in Cape Town, I think was the year after the drought. And in the year of the drought, you very kindly arranged for us to have a visit to one of your hotels, the Park Inn, around the corner from the conference centre in Cape Town. And one of the things that was extremely striking was the way in which that hotel was using combined heat and light generation on the rooftop. But one of the things that really struck me in Cape Town was that it was impossible to find out which hotels were most efficiently using limited water, even in the context of the drought. That information is simply not available. Now, Madhu is suggesting that many of the hotels do actually know how much water and electricity they're consuming, but they're not sharing that information with us yet, are they? And I'm just wondering how you see the future of that. When are we going to get more informed or better opportunities for consumers to make informed decisions about where they choose to stay on the sustainability indicators that matter to people? Is that coming down the line?
I think that's an excellent question, and that's also would be needed as the industry's response to, I would say, the increased pace that Eric was referring to and Madhu was referring to in terms of B2B clients, but also leisure clients around the world who want to know and make informed choices. Now, the first thing to know is that all major and a lot of the responsible hospitality companies have been tracking that energy performance, carbon performance, water and waste performance of our own hotels over time, and we've all been setting reduction targets. What we do internally, though, is set reduction targets hotel against its own performance, because you need to recognize that each hotel is different and you have such a wide scope of hotels. Madhu was referring to it. You have resorts, you have boutique hotels, you have, the major ones, you have ones with upscale service, limited service, et cetera. So there's such a diversity that I believe personally that an absolute number doesn't really mean anything necessarily. What we are working on as a company, but also together with Madhu and the other members of the Alliance, is like a framework to say what is the essential information that we as hotels are working on, and that we can commit to providing in a transparent manner to our clients based on industry accepted and defined tools, such as the Carbon Measurement Initiative and the Water Measurement Initiative, etc. But what are these? What is this information in a meaningful way? Because, for example, we've seen recent frameworks ask us hoteliers to provide transparency, to then provide to clients information like, do you have combined heat and power? Do you have an efficient boiler? Do you have all these technical installations, to provide that information to clients? But honestly, I personally don't think that a client needs to know that. If we all agree on certain things, to your point, Harold, is the hotel improving on its efficiency of water? Do you offer vegetarian meals? Do you offer sustainable transportation of options which are relevant for the person who is using the services of the hotel? I think that's what we need to work on personally, and that's also what we have in the pipeline with the other members together under Madhu's leadership.
But Ingrid, it's very nice that you talk about the Sustainable Hospitality Alliance, and quite rightly. But Radisson's been a leader in these kinds of areas for a very long time, hasn't it? And I guess the question I'd just like to prod you a little is, when do you think Radisson would be ready to do this? Are we looking 10 years, 20 years, 30 years?
No, we need to be, no. We are always transparent, but that is, I would say, in our responsible business report and to the informed stakeholders. So if anybody wants to read our latest report, it's just been published even for our performance in 2020, just a few weeks ago. I do think we need to make a framework. I believe in cooperation, because it's important to say as an industry what we believe those sustainability criteria are. And then I think you will see the members of the Alliance, not just Radisson, but all the members of the Alliance, follow that framework really quickly and share that information transparently. The other thing I would like to say, if travelers are also interested, there's a very good framework that was created with collaboration with Cornell and with the help of Eric also, to put all the carbon footprints and the water footprints in one big database per destination. So a traveler can also kind of know if a destination is more sustainable, or what would be the average to expect. Now, that doesn't answer the question of which hotel to choose, but it does provide information on the destination itself. It does provide some transparency. So in short, I think you will see leading hotel groups like the ones on this panel, like the ones who are members of the Alliance, come up with that kind of framework and information rather soon. And it won't be a thing of years in the future, because we simply see that travelers want that information, whether they are B2B or whether they are B2C.
Harold,
carefully avoided
Harold, sorry, Harold, I'll just come in on that, because I think one of the things that I'd really like people to understand is that sustainability is complex. It's, it's really not about saying this hotel uses X times the amount of water or Y times the amount of, carbon, because a lot of it is context based. And I don't think when it comes to greenhouse emissions, perhaps the context is less important, because you are emitting those gases regardless of where you are. But your specific question was around water, and water is very context based. So, in areas of high water scarcity or high water risk, your water usage and water footprint is perhaps a lot more important than in areas where water is abundant. And that's just a nuance that I want to draw attention to, that it's all relative and the context is important. And I don't think the individual consumer has the time or the technical knowledge to actually go into the details of that. And that's where I feel, working closely with the industry, working on the issues as perhaps Greenview and Sustainable Hospitality Alliance do, and working with the industry, there is a role to play for us to simplify sustainability to the man in the street. And that's what is what's relevant, rather than going down the route of complex questions.
I wasn't suggesting for 1 minute, Madhu, that the route of complex questions is the way to go, but it would have been useful when people were asking me where they should choose to stay in Cape Town 2 years ago, if I'd been able to suggest to them that they could get the information about water consumption on a very specific localized basis in Cape Town, because in Cape Town, the water that year really mattered. And I think maybe it's going to have to be the cities that develop this system if the hotel chains are not going to develop it themselves. But one or the other, either destination-based or hotel company-based, or maybe both for different purposes. But that transparency is surely going to come. But if we come back to other aspects of transparency, it seems to me, Dimitri, you partly focused on this, but it does seem to me when I look at other sectors that increasingly it's the investment companies. If you look at some of the radical things that BlackRock have been saying recently about sustainability, and some of the other major fund investors are saying that it's critical to them. Now, one of the problems about hotels, I think, is that often they are built by someone who's made a great deal of money, often in a different industry, and they want to build a hotel as a kind of symbol of having been successful. So they don't have the same pressure necessarily from the investment sector. But do you think pressure is, and I'll come to you next on this, Eric, do you think that the pressure from the investment sector is going to make a difference on these issues?
I think it will, absolutely. And you know what is a good sign that it doesn't actually stay on paper, and actually people put pressure on hotels and put pressure on us as well as brands and as hotel chains. What are you going to do about it? And it has to do with what I said earlier. It brings the conversation into center stage. So you see more people, more investors talking about sustainability. You see more investors talking about we have to have a duty of care to our shareholders. These are things that a few years back people didn't actually necessarily talk about it. And I think this for me is a huge shift. You know what? There will be people that are going to miss the boat. There are going to be people that they're not going to understand the message. But as Eric said, this is a long-term game. This is hospitality. Is not just I'm going to make a few, a bit of money in a year and then just go and spend it somewhere else. And those who think that way, I think they're just going to disappear. And you will have the people who are staying, the destinations, the countries, the hotel chains, the individual owners, the big investors. All of us together can actually make a change. And that is what is important today, that this conversation is becoming center stage, not just by the hotel chains, not just by the individual owners. It actually for the people that suddenly they have something to say. And this is the big investors and the buyers and the owners themselves. To be fair, I saw owners who a year ago wouldn't actually talk about it. Now they're actually bringing it up themselves, because they do understand that this is now not a conversation that can be put out of the carpet. It's a conversation that is raised in their own home, is they're raised in their own families. Their teenage kids are actually raised in their own home, and they're saying, what are you going to do about it? My daughter, I live with my millennial 23-year-old daughter here in London, and I've learned about my personal sustainable presence as a human being. I've learned things that I didn't know before. I've learned how to recycle properly, things that they were not part of my in my daily life before. These are the people that are going to make the change. the young generation within people's homes, within our environments, within our communities, they're going to be the catalyst of change. That's why I'm exactly like Eric. I'm very optimistic. I believe that the acceleration is happening. I believe that it's coming from all sorts of different angles, and that makes me feel far more comfortable that it's going to happen the right way. It's not just one source. It's not just the hotel chains. It's not just the one owner down the road. It's the community, it's everybody, including the investors who are actually making the move. And that to me is a great sign.
Eric, I want to come to you on, thank you very much indeed, Demetrius. I want to come to you on the same question, Eric, but I wanted just to tell you, I suspect this is a question from a millennial. It's just come in from the audience. They're asking why it takes so long to get inventions and what they call tech for good into operation, which is an interesting question, which I'm sure we're going to come back to on tomorrow's panel as well. But maybe your thoughts on that in the context of how rapidly change is happening and whether it's happening fast enough.
So it depends on the tech, and it depends on the financing, the funding model, right? So it's really tough to renovate a hotel and put in some advanced tech after you've already built it, after you've already made the decisions. There's a lot of complacency. If you look at the value chain of who's designing, building hotels, it's the same old, and there was not much incentive to change. That was the issue. Was there's a systemic issue of not really much incentive to change. Nobody was asking, and then it's difficult once the hotel is built. So there's that, and then the other was there was a lack of creative financing. Or how do you fund this? Because again, if we've budgeted for this hotel, I mean, and it's great with the owner, which we'll talk about in a second, but then it's like, no, I don't have this in my model. I've never built this in. And if there needs to be some other funding mechanism, for example, we'll fund it and you pay an operating expense, or there's an incentive, there's a rebate, there's crowdfunding, there's all kinds of other models of funding and financing, which were part of the heart of the issue on a lot of the tech when it was hard tech. The other is just the hesitancy of the hotel industry, and this is not their fault, but I learned it when I went to hospitality school. You never want to be the first adopter of a revenue management software, of a PMS system. You always want to wait a little bit and then jump in. And that's kind of a mentality of the industry, for a good reason. So we have to sort of change that as well with sustainability of you don't want to fall behind.
But you're still optimistic.
Yes, and exactly what Demetrius said. I mean, this is a perfect storm in that sense. So BlackRock owns a lot of shares in a lot of publicly traded real estate companies that have to act on this now. And that's also why I'm optimistic, because that helps our company. But it's not just publicly traded, it's private equity. You're going to, there's a lot of money out there right now being raised to go and buy hotels. And this money, we've had a lot of private equity coming to us saying, yes, I'm raising a fund and I need to talk about ESG in my fund. And some are going all the way in this, and some are doing the minimum. And so we get to sort of advise them on look, this is where the direction is going. And that's kind of the other, piece that again, we're following the money, but the idea that sort of the one thing is it's an urban hotel and it's operating sustainably. The other is this hotel resort lodge was built with sustainability, health and wellness, nature-based, culture-based activity in the primary visit for the traveler. And that type of resort lodge is an asset class that's now getting serious investment. I mean, the preview to that was Six Senses getting bought by IHG for $300 million based on its pipeline, pretty much, right? I mean, that was a big telling sign. And now we're seeing a lot of investment dollars in real money going in to look for these type of hotels. And we're seeing a lot more affiliation programs, a lot of existing ones and new ones all popping up to capture this idea that there's a big increased market for these experiences as well. And that's big money. And so that's another reason why I'm optimistic, because we do have a lot more demand all around, as Demetrius said.
Eric, do you know of a single hotel which has ever been built and then none of the operators would take it on because it just wasn't sustainable enough?
That's tough to say, and probably not that no operator would touch.
Well, that's going to come, isn't it? It is eventually going to come that a hotel will be built that will be so badly built that nobody will want to take it on.
Well, that's happened, but not necessarily for sustainability purposes. It's happened for other reasons, but
yeah, sure.
But that could be one of them. And if we talk about resiliency, it could be that hey, this hotel was not built to withstand the effects of climate change in this region, in this coastal area, and so now the amount of renovation dollars needed versus the amount of insurance premiums versus the amount of capital, that's a tough one that we probably will see a little more of.
Thanks very much, Eric. I want to just slip back to the other agenda of this afternoon, which ran at to my shame, has been not properly pursued, which is what you were saying about the creation of a sense of I know that the creation of teams is very important to the hotel industry. And clearly there are still massive opportunities for progression for people who will often come in at a relatively junior level, perhaps some people would say an unskilled level, and they work their way up through the industry. It's still a very remarkably open industry. Let's not forget that. But some of the things you were saying about the creation of the sense of being included and of inclusive employment, I think are perhaps worth emphasizing. I don't know if you want to say a little more about that and the way you do it in the Four Seasons.
The sense of inclusion is actually, as I said earlier, is extremely important, and it is one of our, it's part of our culture and it's part of who we are. We are actually addressing this culture in terms of having the transparent communication, addressing very sensitive issues and creating the right environment and the safe environment for the people to come forward and feel comfortable to share what they have. One of the recent initiatives that we have actually implemented is creating what we call a colleagues communication forum. This consists of different colleagues from all the departments of the hotel. These colleagues were actually selected by their departments, where there were elections, and they selected them as representatives. This group of individuals, they are the ones who are involved with us, with the senior management, in terms of the decision-making process. Ideas are being run through them and getting their feedback. And of course, the communication is both ways. So they are feeding us up as well with whatever issues or challenges that needs to be addressed. And they are part of the solution as well, not only they're bringing up the problems. This is one way of making sure that employees and individuals are being included and their voices are being heard. Other strategies, of course, that would be a part of the recruitment strategies, that would tackle different parts of the inclusion. However, it's a journey and it's not a destination, of course. And as I said, this is part of our culture. This is part of who we are, and we're learning together every day of how to ensure and further improve the inclusion amongst the employees.
Thank you very much indeed, Ryan. We're coming towards the end of our session. I think we're into about the last 12 minutes. So what I'd like to do is to go around and invite each of you to just have, in not more than a couple of minutes, just say what you think are the major priorities, not necessarily for your own businesses, but for the sector going forward over the next 10 and 20 years, with a view perhaps to encourage people to put some substance on the optimism that you are all showing this afternoon. Dimitris, can we start with you maybe?
Yeah, for me, it's relatively simple. Hospitality needs to be part of the community. We don't just run standalone hotels or a pile of bricks in front of a beautiful museum or at a beautiful beach somewhere. We are part of the community. I think the words purpose, culture, duty of care, they need to come back into our narrative and our storytelling. I think we need to make hospitality interesting again for the young generation. Education is going to be key. Curiosity is going to be key. Bring that young generation that is going to be a catalyst of change. And at the same time, I want to make for me as an individual and for us as a company, ESG is a reflection of the whole and the individuals. It's not just a nice report that we publish, which we do publish like everybody else. It's embedded in our culture, our values, our count on us culture, and our count on me culture as individuals and as a group. So I'm very optimistic. I do see the change happening. I do see the young generation, actually, as I said, making that change. And I do believe that the hospitality industry is a resilient industry and is here to stay. There is only one caveat. It's going to be a marathon, not a sprint. Nobody should expect that things are going to change in 6 months or a year. We all have to be patient and we all have to work together. And remember, hospitality is not just about a hotel. Hospitality is the taxi driver, is the airport, is the restaurant owner. It's all of us. It's not just about the hotel and the team. It's the whole community, the whole ecosystem. But what I see around, and I see everything that my colleagues have spoken about, actually, I'm going to leave this panel today feeling far more optimistic than what I was when I came in. And I was very optimistic when I came in. That means that I'm extremely excited about the future of our industry.
Eric, have the other people on the panel made you even more optimistic than I know you always are?
Definitely. I think this is this is a time for optimism, but it's also time for action. And that's it's not a time for new and launching new things. It's a time for catalyzing and accelerating solutions that are there. And there's a lot of what has been talked about here today. The solutions are there. We have common measurement of carbon footprints, HCMI. We have common benchmarking, HSB. The Alliance has a lot of tools on a lot of the issues we've talked about today that are readily available. We've got tools as well. We haven't collaborated with them. Look at our destination water risk index to look at, for example, if you want to take a look at water risk. So I'm optimistic because we have everybody's attention. And now is the time to talk about action, because it's a matter of what do I do and how do I orient. So I think that's it. And then finally, Dimitri, I think this exactly back to the the hospitality itself. There's been a time for reflection for me personally, because this is now 20 years working in sustainability, and why I got into this and why I wanted sustainable tourism to be my career path was the idea that you can actually have an experience, and hospitality can help improve nature, get an experience with it, and interact with local culture, but also to show people a good time, right? And be hospitable. And more that connection is happening between what does it mean to give good service, to satisfy a customer, to please, and what does it mean to protect the environment and improve the livelihoods of people. And that's actually as ambitious as it sounds. I actually think we're much closer now.
So in a sense, what you're saying, if I can paraphrase it perhaps, and I hope I do it in a way you're happy with, 20 years now of a lot of different experiments, a lot of different solutions been tried and tested. We've seen it in the Responsible Tourism Awards as well. Lots and lots of solutions out there now which have been proven, and I'm sure that across the different hotel groups that's been the experience too. So the problem now, it seems to me, is really to implement those solutions on a much bigger scale. We're looking really at scaling up, and in most areas we do have viable solutions which will make a big difference.
I agree. I just my main point when we talk to anybody is it's about process right now. Getting sustainability into the process of everything you're doing, so you can cope with the pace of change and find those solutions.
Ingrid, would I be right in thinking that that's one of the reasons that Radisson has been a leader in this field, that you've continuously done that across the Radisson hotel groups?
Well, thank you, Harold. And yes, we have done that, but I don't think that if these past 18 months have taught us anything, is that we can't assume that what we have done before is good enough for the future. Nothing is like it was 18 months ago. So as we are coming out of this perfect storm, as you called this crisis, and the very suitable title of this session, I think we need to really be ready to continue to focus as a responsible company on what are the new or reinforced choices we make when we recover. Because that's really something I've been saying to our leadership as we went into the definition of our 5-year plan to 2025. I said, we cannot just say because we were very good in 2017, 18, 19, that means we're going to be good now, because these demands from the outside world have changed. The expectations from travelers are changing. The expectations from investors are changing, and rapidly so. So I think both on the planet and the people side, and also on the destination side, we need to accelerate action. I mean, I've said it multiple times, but we know there's no vaccine against climate change. And after this third wave of COVID, there's this huge fourth wave of climate change that is coming. And we need to, as companies, accelerate our targets. And I agree with you, move towards a system of transparency where we can inform our B2B clients and our B2C clients. And on the people side, I fully agree with Dimitris. We are, as hospitality, we are the motor. We can be the engine of local change and local opportunities. If I look at so many locations around the world where we, with Radisson, are the only or the first international brand to arrive, and in those locations we have a huge opportunity to train, develop, and provide opportunities for local development and local employment. We do that a lot for youth. So we work on various youth employment programs, but also inclusive programs towards vulnerable groups in society. I think we should accelerate that to make sure that tourism in all these locations is inclusive. And I also think that we need to cooperate. I really believe firmly in cooperation. We can't do this alone. We need to do this together in destinations. You mentioned Cape Town. I think at that time of the drought, the actions of various actors across the value chain and also of the government locally was decisive. We need that. We need that on water. We need that on plastics. And we need the industry to come together and to really work in certain destinations to prove and to put in action all these best solutions that you say are ready, and it's true. Let's put them in action to fight the issues of plastic, water scarcity, but also to ensure, like we are doing with the Alliance, for example, ethical recruitment practices are implemented in a certain region. So I think people, planet, destinations, and collaboration, those would be the things that I'm banking on and putting my energy in for the next years.
Thank you, Inge. Rana, what would you like to say as we come to the end?
Yeah, as we are coming back and preparing to reopen the hotels, the demand for talents will definitely increase. Therefore, as an industry, we need to really think and work on recruiting ethically, making sure that we have our policies updated, protocols established, grievance mechanisms in place. Afterwards, then we have to retain those talents by allowing themselves and giving them the space to be themselves, and bringing their own individual characters into the workplace, so they feel that they can be comfortable who they are and not pretend to be somebody else. Creating that environment is really important, because yes, as hospitality, we have huge responsibility where we can influence and employ the young generation and give them that pathway to success and excel in the future.
I've watched many times students of mine who've gone and got part-time jobs working in hospitality, and the way in which it's improved their social skills immeasurably, far more than the university would ever have achieved. And I don't think we should ever ignore that contribution that the hospitality sector makes to education generally. Yeah. Madhu, it's been as ever a pleasure to put this panel together with you. And as you say, most of the people on this panel are either members or who work quite closely with you. I'd like to think I was one of the people who works quite closely with you too. As we come to the end of this panel though, what would you like to say by way of summing up, but maybe reflecting on this, but also thinking a little aloud about where the Hospitality Alliance is going next?
So Harold, I think I don't know how much time I have left to cover all of that, but I think what I will say is there's a lot of conversation, and we've seen even from this panel a lot of conversation happening around our planet agenda. And for me, I would like to just restore the balance a bit and say, unless we are focused on our people, unless we are focused on reducing inequalities and taking the most vulnerable on the journey with us, no matter what we do about the planet, it's not going to achieve the impact it has. So I would say there's an increased need for the dialogue to ramp up on inequalities, on migration, on ethical recruitment, on all the social issues where hospitality can certainly make an impact. So that's one key message for me. I think the second thing for me is around the role of partnerships that have in context of driving social change. And one of the partnerships that I'm really proud of at the Alliance is one that we have with UN bodies such as International Labour Organization and International Organization for Migration, which has allowed us the ability to bring government funders, to bring UN bodies, to bring the private sector together to look at systemic issues that exist and that needs to be addressed. So we started, given we are an Arabian travel market and talking about Middle East, we started working with ILO in Qatar to look at ethical recruitment in the run-up to FIFA World Cup. And with UN International Organization of Migration, we have formed a partnership that looks at helping the hotel industry assess risks in its very complex labor supply chain, look at what capacity building needs to happen to create demand for ethical recruitment and capacity build agencies in fulfilling that demand, look at blockchain technology, somebody asked for blockchain technology that helps map those risks, and then capacity build hotels through helping them develop the policies, the procedures, the know-how in implementing some of those policies. So looking at an issue systematically, and that for me is really important and powerful because it's an example of UN SDG 17 in action, bringing together the private sector, bringing together the not-for-profit sector, the civil society and the governments to address an issue holistically and in a way that can be replicated across the globe. So those are my key messages. Focus on, take a balanced approach to people and planet because they're both equally important. Focus on the role of multi-stakeholder partnerships and impact, and look at addressing inequality in all its forms across various agendas.
Thanks very much indeed, Madhu. We are indeed very much out of time. You certainly had the last word, and we are going to wrap up now. But one of the things I think has come through as a theme which you didn't capture, I don't think, Madhu, in your final comments there, was what Dimitris started with, talking about the importance of seeing the hotel as being part of the community, particularly of the local community and its relationships beyond the walls of the hotel and out there into the broader society in the places where you work. Because one of the things I think is unique about the hotels in the travel and tourism sector is that you can't very easily move a hotel. Once you've built it, you need to be part of that community, and that means you have to have those good relationships with the local community, whereas the tour operators, airlines, cruise lines and so on can so easily move away when things get difficult. But can I conclude by saying a big thank you to all of you for your time this afternoon. I think it's been a very stimulating and broad-ranging discussion, and I thank you all very much for your contribution this afternoon. Thank you.